I write this as an apology to those who are affected by my mistakes. I hope that you can find it in your heart to forgive me, though I will understand if you can't. My wife was terminally ill, and a few months ago she died. I was very sad at the losses, as she was a marvelous, caring woman. She was kind, and everything that met her said their lives were better for it. I couldn't bear the pain, though, so I did something terrible. I will not tell you how I did it, or how I learned to, for enough damage has been done. But I found a way to bring her back, to raise her from the dead. I can no longer bear to be alone, and I have made a terrible mistake in my loneliness. When I finished the ritual, nothing happened. Not at first. Anyway, I was about to rebury her when I first started to hear her breathing, with an understandable measure of joy. I realized that the sound was emanating from her mouth. I had done it. At the time, I could not fully understand what it was, but in my blissful ignorance, I carried her home. She was not the same. She was no longer caring, but primal, instinctive. She howled and screamed and snarled at me. Whenever I passed, I was worried. Not for my own sake, but for hers. She could escape. She could go out, do something to get hurt. Let the record show that it was for her own good that I lock her in my basement. I never meant to keep her there, that way. I never knew that my actions would set a chain reaction of unformidable horrors. Into action. I kept her there for as long as I could, but her screams grew more and more desperate. I was chilled to my very core by the screams of betrothed, and before long, I stood on the rain, slick, precise of insanity. I needed to do something. As it so happened, I was not the only one to hear the screams. My neighbors began to show interest, eventually sneaking onto my estate to snoop around. I caught them in the act, and as I had no explanation for what they may have seen, I attacked them. I didn't kill them, but they were unable to leave on their own accord. And as I feared the consequences of letting them go, I locked them in the basement with my wife. This was my second mistake. The first, of course, being that I raised her in the first place. That night, I knew the sound of crunching bone. Upon my awakening in the morning, I went down to check on the neighbors. One was gone. The other was wide-eyed, cowering in the corner, and covered in blood. Something else was off. Though at first, I did not know what. Then it hit me. The screams had subsided. My wife was asleep. She had fed, and now she slumbered. All this time, the screams were of hunger. I shut the door, went down to lie. She lasted a few more days, obviously feasting on the other neighbor. It It seemed that she only needed to eat once every few days. No, I'm not proud of what I did next, but I didn't know what else to do. I went out at night every few days. Around the time only a few people would still be around. I stalked the streets and attacked people who walked alone. I would take them back to my wife and leave them in the basement. I would often wake from my slumber to hear their screams, cries for help. This would always arouse the beast and would never last longer than a minute or so. 10 minutes of crunching and gurgling. Pleased. Later the deed would be done. And I could rest easy for another few days. Although I did now kill anyone. I may as well have. It was my actions that brought about the deaths of so many, and my actions that robbed so many of loved ones of closure. How many thorn and blooded rags did I burn? How many personal effects were destroyed by my hands? I lost track of the numbers, but surely even one is too high a number. I was kept awake. It screams, and it shall henceforth be referred to as it. For I have come to the conclusion that this monster is not my beloved. So I fed it a night of rest for the lives of so many. Day by day it grew stronger, its strength either increasing or returning. For I know what horrible beast is now in possession of my wife's body. And as time went on, I was forced to bring more and more food home. Bigger people, men, 2 women, a woman and a man. Eventually, it was eating a full-grown man every day. I knew, in some dark corner of my mind, I knew that this could not go on forever. I could not keep taking people. I was in danger of being caught. And though I deserved to be, fear took hold of me. And that, I suppose, is why I let that charade go on for so long as it did. So I decided to flee. I had just packed my bags when I heard a knock on my door. The police had found a trail of blood leading through the woods up to my estate and were inquiring as to whether I'd seen or heard anything suspicious. I managed to keep it cool and talk my way out of it, or what could have potentially been a very unpleasant situation. I know not why, only that I deserve it. It began to scream. It screamed louder than I had ever heard it scream before, and it sounded mad. The police instantly drew their guns and went in, thinking perhaps some horrific predatory beast had made its way into my home. They eventually found my basement door and threw it open slowly. Ever so slowly, they descended the stairs. I was at a loss for what to do, so I did the only thing I could do. I could think of it in the heat of the moment. I shut the door. Throwing the bolt across, I ran to my quarters and grabbed my bags, making for the door. The screams of the police haunt me to this very day. I heard the sounds of splintering wood as that thing burst out of its cell. It was now loose in the house. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me out of there. out into the street of the town I had stalked, into the train, and I left the place far behind. My old home is a ghost town now, splashed with blood, yet no bodies remain. How I long to return to my estate to gather up all of my research and burn it so that this might never happen again. I've made many an attempt to do so. In fact, though, every time I get near, I hear that beast's wild howls, screaming for flesh. I know it haunts my home now. I know it wears my wife's skin. But the worst part of all this, I let it happen.